She walked into the restaurant like she owned the place. Diamonded, arrogant, untouchable. But what she didn't know was that the woman she humiliated didn't just serve the table. She owned the entire room. This is the story of how one waitress, quiet but powerful, reminded everyone that dignity isn't given, it's earned. In the heart of downtown Atlanta, where fine dining met reputation, stood Orem, an upscale restaurant known as much for its gold-dipping decor as its gold standard cuisine. On Friday night, the crystal chandeliers reflected elegance down to every polished wine glass. The staff moved like trained dancers, each step rehearsed, each smile intentional. It was a place where status wasn't just welcomed, it was expected. Among the velvet-draped entrants walked Genevieve Langston, a woman whose last name alone could buy tables others waited months to reserve. Her emerald silk dress shimmered as she entered, a diamond brooch catching the eye of every host within sight. She didn't acknowledge them, not with her eyes, not with a nod. Genevieve didn't see service, she saw usefulness. Trailing behind her were two women equally refined, though clearly orbiting her influence. "Private suite," Genevieve said with a wave, barely glancing at the hostess stand. "Langston, 7 p.m. Her voice was clipped, British accented, and soaked with entitlement. The hostess stammered politely and gestured for a waitress nearby. That waitress, dressed in crisp black and white, was Amira Dawson. Early 20s, graceful but clearly fatigued, she gave a professional nod and led them toward the private dining area tucked behind frosted glass panels. Genevieve didn't look at Amira yet, but that was about to change. Amira Dawson kept her pace steady, her back straight, and her expression unreadable as she guided Genevieve Langston and her entourage to the private suite. The room was elegantly set, gold-rimmed plates, fresh orchids, and the faint scent of lemongrass diffusing from a hidden corner. Amira gestured gracefully toward the table. "If there's anything you need, ladies, I'll be right with you," she said with a polite smile. Genevieve gave her a glance, sharp, assessing, dismissive. "You'll start by bringing mineral water," she said flatly. "No ice, room temperature, and don't disappear like the last one did." "Of course," Amira replied without missing a beat, though her heart sank a little. Behind her calm eyes was a storm. It had been a long week. 3 double shifts, a final exam coming up, rent overdue. She couldn't afford to snap, not here, not now, not with Genevieve Langston. As Amira stepped out to fulfill the order, Genevieve turned to her friends with a smirk. "They let anyone work in these places now. I swear, standards have plummeted. Did you see her nails?" Laughter followed, low but cruel. One of her friends, Marissa, took a sip of wine. "At least she tried to smile," she said mockingly. Genevieve snorted. "A smile isn't enough, not when you're paid to serve." What none of them realized was that every word floated out just loud enough. The maitre d' heard. The sommelier heard. And so did the man in the navy blazer sitting at the bar. He stirred his drink once, slowly, eyes fixed on that private suite. The man in the navy blazer sat with the quiet presence of someone who had long ago learned how to own a room without ever raising his voice. His name was Isaac Morgan, and though few recognized him at first glance, he didn't need to be recognized to be remembered. Sharp jawline, salt and pepper beard trimmed close, and a calm that bordered on unsettling. He didn't speak often, but when he did, people listened. Tonight, he wasn't just a guest. He was observing. He had seen Amira before, not just as a waitress, but as a person. He knew the weight she carried, the struggles she shouldered, the nights she stayed late even after the doors were locked. Most importantly, he knew what most people didn't. And that secret sat quietly in his back pocket until he needed it. From his seat at the edge of the bar, Isaac could hear every cruel word spilling from Genevieve Langston's table. The way she mocked Amira's appearance, dismissed her efforts, turned her friend's giggles into something poisonous. He saw Amira reappear with the water, her shoulders squared, her face blank, her dignity intact. But he also saw her hands, trembling slightly. Genevieve didn't thank her. Instead, she examined the water like it was a science experiment. Did she rinse the glass honestly? Fingerprints? Another laugh. Isaac set his drink down. He didn't react loudly. He simply looked to the manager, Elijah, a loyal employee for 10 years, and nodded once. Elijah's expression shifted, subtle, serious. He knew exactly what that nod meant. And so the clock began ticking. Amira returned to the kitchen with the empty pitcher, her face still calm, but her chest tightened. She'd heard Genevieve's words, every one of them. The nail comment, the mocking smile, the snide remarks about her ability to serve water. They weren't just rude, they were calculated, designed to sting while maintaining the illusion of class. She stood near the prep counter, taking a slow breath. Behind her, the line cooks chopped, sautéed, and plated with rhythmic efficiency. No one had time for breakdowns, not even her. But Chef Raymond, the head chef, noticed. He didn't say much, just met her eyes briefly and gave a slow, quiet nod. "You're stronger than this," it seemed to say. Amira straightened, grabbed the appetizer tray, and made her way back. Inside the private suite, Genevieve was regaling her companions with stories of her recent trip to the French Riviera. "The staff at Chateau Marais knew how to treat their guests," she drawled, "unlike here, where the help walks like they're balancing books on their heads." The table erupted in forced laughter. Amira entered, placed the starters with perfect precision, and stepped back. Genevieve raised an eyebrow. "You're still here?" she asked, her tone like acid beneath velvet. "I'll be nearby if you need anything," Amira said softly. But just as she turned to leave, Genevieve added, loud enough for the entire hallway to hear, "Let's hope she doesn't drop anything. I doubt they could afford replacements on her salary." In the hallway, a waiter froze. At the bar, Isaac Morgan stood, and the lesson was about to begin. Isaac Morgan stepped away from the bar, calm and deliberate. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't need to. His presence alone caused heads to turn. As he made his way toward the back hallway, Elijah, the manager, quietly joined him. No words were exchanged, just a glance and a shared understanding. It was time. Meanwhile, inside the suite, Amira kept moving. She cleared the appetizer plates with quiet grace, even as Genevieve continued her performance. "Honestly, the oysters were warm, warm. How does one mess up a dish that's supposed to be chilled?" Marissa chuckled, sipping her rosé. "Maybe they store everything next to the heater." Genevieve grinned. "Wouldn't surprise me. This place talks like it's 5-star, but runs like a soup kitchen." Clara, a busser no older than 19, stood in the corner clutching a tray. Her face flushed with silent fury. Amira gave her a subtle shake of the head. "Don't engage." But the tension had reached the walls now. Patrons from nearby rooms were whispering. One elderly couple had stopped eating entirely, listening to the spectacle unfold. Genevieve's voice cut through the murmur like a blade. "The next time I dine out, remind me to choose a restaurant that doesn't hire charity cases." A heavy pause filled the air. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate, of polished shoes on marble. Isaac Morgan stepped through the frosted glass door. He didn't look at Genevieve. He looked at Amira and nodded. The storm had officially arrived. The moment Isaac entered, the suite fell into an uneasy silence. Even Genevieve, in all her habitual dominance, paused. There was something about Isaac Morgan, his posture, his eyes, the quiet weight of his presence, that made people instinctively lower their voices. Amira stepped back, standing beside Clara with her hands clasped tightly behind her back. Her heart thudded against her ribs, but her face remained composed. Genevieve recovered quickly, plastering on her society smile. "Well," she said, dabbing at the corner of her lips with her napkin, "if you're the manager, perhaps you can help your staff understand the difference between acceptable and barely tolerable." Isaac didn't flinch. He looked straight at her. "I'm not the manager," he said smoothly. "I'm the owner." Genevieve blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Isaac stepped closer, then turned slightly to gesture at Amira. "And this young woman you have been belittling for the past 40 minutes?" His voice was low, measured. "She's not only a member of my team, she's my daughter." Gasps rippled through the dining area outside the suite. Even Marissa's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Genevieve stared at Isaac, color draining from her cheeks. "Daughter?" she repeated, her voice suddenly unsure. Isaac nodded. "Amira Dawson Morgan, graduate student, entrepreneur, and yes, waitress by choice, because she believes that true leadership begins at every level." He turned his gaze back to Genevieve, and for the first time she looked small. The queen of the room had just been dethroned. Genevieve opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her friends looked anywhere but at her, suddenly fascinated by the grain of the table, their own reflections in the polished cutlery, the orchids in the vase. Isaac didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I've built Orem with one core value," he said to the room now, not just the suite. "Respect for our guests, for our team, for the people who give this place its soul." Amira stood still, her throat tight. She had spent years letting people underestimate her, thinking she was just a face in a uniform, someone beneath notice. But tonight her silence had become her strength. Isaac turned to Clara and said gently, "Take a short break, please." Clara nodded and left quietly, tears threatening the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from pride. Genevieve tried to muster a rebuttal, her voice finally returning. "I didn't mean, it wasn't personal, I just—" "Intent," Isaac said calmly, "doesn't erase impact. You may not have meant to wound anyone, but you did." A server quietly entered with a bottle of rare vintage champagne in an envelope, handing it to Isaac without a word. He turned back to the table and placed both in front of Genevieve. "This was meant to be a gift," he said, "a token of appreciation for our most loyal customers. But now its purpose has changed." Genevieve frowned, unsure whether to feel grateful or ashamed. "I'll be donating the value of this bottle," Isaac continued, "along with the entire cost of your meal tonight, to a nonprofit organization that helps young women like Amira and Clara. Women who are working, studying, surviving. Women who endure condescension in places like this every day." The entire restaurant was quiet. Even the music had stopped. A man near the bar whispered, "Damn right." Someone else clapped once, then again. It wasn't a loud applause, but a ripple of approval moved through the guests like a wave of conscience. Genevieve sat paralyzed. Her kingdom had crumbled. Her voice, the weapon she had wielded so expertly, had failed her. Isaac turned to Amira. "You handled tonight with more grace than most CEOs I know," he said, his voice softening slightly, "and more professionalism than anyone had the right to ask of you." Amira gave a small nod. She didn't trust her voice, not yet, but her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with quiet vindication. Genevieve's friends were now shifting in their seats, visibly uncomfortable. One finally tried to break the tension. "We didn't realize she was—" "You didn't need to know who she was," Isaac said sharply, his eyes flashing for the first time that night. "You just needed to treat her like a human being." That silence, so often reserved for great speeches and grand finales, descended over the room again. Not a silence of fear, but of reflection. Everyone was looking inward now. Genevieve, whose voice once commanded attention, now said nothing. Isaac stepped back. "Mrs. Langston, I think it's best you conclude your evening here." Genevieve gasped. "You're asking me to leave?" "I'm not asking," Isaac said. "I'm insisting." Genevieve's mouth moved as if searching for a retort, but her lips failed her. Slowly she stood, grabbing her silver clutch. Her friends followed, heads low, avoiding the eyes of everyone around them. As they passed Amira, Genevieve glanced her way for the first time, not with scorn, but with shame. But Amira didn't meet her gaze. She was already focused on something else. The guests who smiled at her, nodded at her, offered soft thank yous with their eyes. Genevieve exited through the same door she entered, but this time no heads turned in admiration. Only quiet acknowledgement that even the highest fall when they forget the value of others. And inside, the rhythm of the restaurant returned, not unchanged, but renewed. A lesson had been served, and it tasted like justice. As the glass doors closed behind Genevieve and her entourage, a collective exhale passed through the dining hall like a gust of wind. The chandeliers still sparkled. The waitstaff resumed their steps. The music resumed softly, but nothing was quite the same. At a booth near the window, a mother leaned over to whisper to her teenage daughter, "That's what grace looks like." Across the room, a couple in their 60s raised their wine glasses slightly toward Amira in quiet salute. She nodded back, lips pressed into a grateful, modest smile. Elijah, the manager, approached with a clipboard in hand, but his eyes were warm. "I've worked in this industry 20 years, he said softly, "and I've never seen anyone handle that with the poise you did." Amira exhaled a little. "I didn't want a scene." "You didn't make one," he replied. "She did. You just reminded the room what leadership looks like." Amira looked across the floor, seeing how people now looked at her differently. Not like a server, not like background noise, but like someone who mattered. And that change wasn't temporary. It was awakening. In the kitchen, Clara was still leaning near the prep counter, sipping from a paper cup of water. She turned as Amira entered, and the two locked eyes. Then Clara whispered, "That was incredible." Amira smiled and leaned against the counter next to her. "I'm just tired of pretending we have to accept it." "You didn't just stand up for yourself," Clara said, eyes shining. "You stood up for all of us." A voice chimed in from behind them. "That's the boss I know." It was Chef Raymond, still in his apron, his arms crossed, but a rare grin breaking across his face. "We cooked the food. You just cooked that woman's ego." They all laughed, not out of mockery, but out of release, of pressure, of silence, of years of swallowing pain and insults. That laugh echoed through the kitchen like music. As the staff cleaned up and the evening rush settled into a soft lull, Elijah handed Amira something unexpected, an envelope. "This was left at the podium," he said. Amira raised an eyebrow. The envelope was made of cream-colored cardstock, her name written in flowing cursive. No return address, no logo. She opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, short, uneven. Like the writer had struggled between pride and apology. "Dear Miss Dawson, tonight I was wrong, deeply wrong. I spoke without thinking, acted without kindness, and failed to treat you with the respect you deserve. You taught me something I didn't expect to learn tonight. Please know that I am truly sorry." GL Samira read it twice. Her fingers traced the edge of the page. Forgiveness wasn't automatic, but accountability was a start. The next morning, the restaurant was bathed in golden sunlight. Amira arrived early, as always, before the prep team, before the music, before the noise. She walked past the row of tables, straightening napkins, adjusting orchids. Everything looked the same, but felt changed. She placed the envelope in her locker, not as a souvenir, but as proof. People can change, even the ones who least expect to. And more importantly, that her silence had never meant weakness. Her restraint was power. Her presence, undeniable. Isaac appeared at the door, coffee in hand. "Couldn't sleep," he said. Amira chuckled. "Me neither." He walked beside her in silence, the kind of silence that's comfortable between people who've weathered storms together. "I'm proud of you," he said at last. "I'm proud of us," she replied. Because they hadn't just built a restaurant, they had built a standard. Lunchtime brought a steady flow of guests. Regulars, first-timers, a few who had been there the night before and returned, not for the menu, but for the message. People watched Amira now, but not out of curiosity, out of respect. She smiled at every table, offered water with grace, took orders with dignity. Not because she had to, but because that was who she was. Power didn't have to be loud. It could be it could be quiet, it could wear an apron and still own the room. At table 4, a young girl asked her, "Are you really the boss here?" Amira leaned in with a wink. "What do you think?" The girl smiled. "You look like one." And Amira, for the first time in a long time, felt like more than a survivor. She felt seen. She felt right where she belonged. That night, Amira sat in her modest apartment overlooking the edge of downtown. Her apron was folded neatly on the arm of the couch, and a cup of chamomile tea steamed gently between her hands. She stared at the city skyline, not with ambition, but with clarity. She knew the story of what happened at Orem would spread. It always did. Not because of social media, there were no cameras, no recordings, but because some stories carry their own wings. Patrons would recount the tale over brunches and board meetings. The night a waitress stood tall without ever raising her voice, and the woman who thought she ruled the room left without her crown. She didn't crave the attention. She just hoped the lesson lingered. Her phone buzzed, an anonymous text with only one line. "Respect isn't a trend. Thank you for reminding me." No name, but Amira knew exactly who it was from. She smiled, not in triumph, but in peace. The following week, something curious happened. New applicants arrived at Orem, some young, some older, each one mentioning how they'd heard about what happened. But what was more surprising was the number of former guests who returned not for the food, but to speak to Amira. One woman left a handwritten note folded with her receipt. "My daughter serves tables while in law school. You stood up for her, too." An elderly gentleman requested Amira by name. My wife passed last year, he said gently. You reminded me of her grace. She believed in kindness, even when others didn't. The culture of Orem changed, not because of policy, but because of presence. Staff stood taller, customers spoke gentler. There was a new tone in the room, one you couldn't decorate or bottle. It was dignity, and it started with one quiet voice that refused to be crushed. Across town, in a penthouse, far removed from linen aprons and kitchen heat, Genevieve Langston, or rather the woman beneath the name, sat alone at a marble counter. Her reflection in the blacked-out window stared back with unfamiliarity. The woman in the mirror no longer looked like a queen. She looked human. She had replayed that night 1,000 times, not just Isaac's words, but the look in Amira's eyes, calm, unshaken, steady. She had written the letter not to save face, but because something in her had shifted. The mask had cracked, and behind it was someone she barely recognized. Someone who had once believed money excused cruelty. Now she wasn't so sure. On her phone was a draft email, an offer to fund a scholarship program. No publicity, no credit, just a beginning. Weeks passed. Amira continued to work the floor, though now she also oversaw training sessions, worked with community organizations, and hosted monthly staff roundtables. She still wore her apron, still served tables. But people knew who she was now. Not just the owner's daughter, not just a waitress, but the architect of a new standard. Isaac watched her from the far booth one night. Same blazer, same drink, same proud silence. She's better than I ever was, he murmured to Elijah. She's exactly what this world needs, Elijah replied. And he was right, because Amira wasn't just running a restaurant. She was rewriting the rules of what respect looked like in a world that had forgotten. On a quiet evening long after the last dessert had been plated and the last candle extinguished, Amira stood at the front of the restaurant. The doors were locked, the city was quiet, and the world for a moment felt still. She walked through the dining room slowly, her hand trailing along the chairs. Every table held memories now, not of meals but of moments, of silent triumphs, of dignity restored. She paused by the suite where it had all begun, and smiled. Because the real power of that night wasn't in exposing Genevieve. It was in awakening something greater, in others and in herself. And as she flipped the sign on the door from open to closed, Amira knew some stories feed the body. But the best ones? They feed the soul. Kindness doesn't cost a thing, but its absence can cost everything. We often judge others by status, by uniform, by role. But true character is revealed not by how we treat those above us, but by how we treat those we think are beneath us. Because one day the person you dismiss may just own the room you walk in.